Hi guys, how you doing? It's Dom here from the Whole Yes podcast. Just had the pleasure of interviewing my good pals Dan Hargreaves and Anthony Neylon from the Gimme a Whole Yeah podcast, which I'm also involved in. But I thought it'd be cool to get their thoughts on podcasting from Hull, starting a wrestling podcast in the area, and obviously their favourite parts of Hull and what they love about the city. I thought it was a cool opportunity while we're just starting out to do something like this with my friends. So hopefully you enjoy it and you don't mind, and hopefully you get something out of this. So yeah, Hull yeah, see you guys soon. All right, guys, this is episode 4 of the Hull Yes podcast, where we talk about Hull, great things about the city, and to some of the coolest people in Hull. Now, full transparency, I'm here with the boys from the Gimme a Hull Yeah Wrestling podcast, which I am also a part of. However, I wanted to talk to these guys because they are the personality of the podcast and the best bits, Dan and Anthony. So, guys, how are you doing? How's it all going? And tell me why and how with the wrestling podcast. Like, why did you set it up and what are your goals with it? I guess we'll start with Anthony because you, alongside me, started it and then Dan came along.
Yeah, thanks, dude. This is like just one of our streams. This is what we do, just chat on video nowadays. Well, great. No, thank you so much for having us on, Dom. Like I say, we're really proud of the podcast. And can I say, what a great YouTube name Hull Yes is. It's also almost like the copyright from Gimme a Hull Yeah was not put in time to stop this action happening immediately. The Gimme a Hull Yeah name was something that we talked about at the start. One of the names that we wanted for the podcast was Dominant Podcast, because it sounds a bit like dominant, which was a play on words, really, a pun on words, and then come up with the idea of Hull Yeah. We both loved it because it was incorporating. It was in 2017, and it was incorporating the city that we both grew up in and love into wrestling with for those of you that don't know wrestling, Gimme a Hull Yeah, Gimme a Hell Yeah was something that one of the most famous wrestlers of all time, Stone Cold Steve Austin, said. So even when we created this podcast, we wanted to incorporate this into them. We wanted to we're two Yorkshire lads who are talking about wrestling, so why not incorporate that location in there? And also, we're not just like these guys who are super bubbly and super energetic all the time. We're just two blokes who just talk about wrestling, and that's how it sort of started. And then later on, we expanded, and Dan joined us as well. And it's been great having Dan onto the team, not just in terms of the video content that he produces, especially covering Monday Night Raw, which I still don't know how he sits through, but also like he's become so much more than that. And it would be amiss to not mention other people like the moderators, Jack and Sassy, who do a wonderful job. Jack works on the website as well. So we've created this little community of people who Jack, Dan, and Sassy. I never knew any of them. I think that Dom, is it fair to say you'd met Dan briefly, but didn't know him too well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went in to get a phone, I think during my counselling training, and then Dan was there, and I fell in love with his hair and his infectious attitude, and that's how we brought Dan in. I mean, to Dan then, as an extension of what Anthony was saying there, as someone that's a part of the podcast, what is the biggest challenges? You arguably do the hardest shift of us all on Monday Night Raw. What are the biggest challenges of running a podcast which is principally geared to an American audience, coming out of the city of Hull in East Yorkshire in the UK?
For me, I mean, you two probably will attest to this more than anything after yesterday, is the times that we normally watch stuff, because it is live from the US, it is very early hours of the morning. And I mean, some of the shows do go on like last night until 4, 5, sometimes even 6 o'clock in the morning. The one that I do is normally 1 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock, and that's every single Monday night. Luckily, with the job that I do normally get Tuesdays off, so I don't have to be up Tuesday for work. But even if I do, I enjoy the community that we've got. We've built a good sort of loyal following. So having them people come in every single week and multiple times a week for Wednesday nights, for Friday nights, it's just nice to have them friends available to sort of have a chat to. It sounds very unusual to say it's one person sat talking about wrestling, for 3 hours. But when you've got the feedback from the community that we've got, it's just so nice to be able to have an outlet for wrestling. I know before sort of meeting Dom and then just watching you two in lockdowns, wrestling wasn't something I talked about and spoke a lot about. But now, if I don't mention wrestling, I feel like I haven't expressed myself. So just having that outlet just gives me a bit more positivity and a little bit more sort of get up and go with having you guys sort of here every week as well. It's just a nice outlet to be able to sort of chat about wrestling and about things that we like.
Yeah, absolutely. Starting with Dan and going on to Anthony then, obviously we are based in the City of Hull. It's not typically associated with projects and sort of media platforms broadcasting that goes around the world. Obviously we do have an audience across the world in Gimme a Hull Yeah. What's been the highlight in developing that audience for you, and how do you think it's been done? So if we start with Dan, why and how do you think that we have been able to, at the Gimme a Hull Yeah podcast, develop an audience that is not just regional, not just local to Hull and East Yorkshire, but around the world?
As Ant was saying, it's just 3 regular guys. There's nothing completely remarkable. We haven't done anything in wrestling itself, like sort of work in the industry, I don't think. But it's just 3 people talking about the love of wrestling. And usually, them are the people that you gel with best. So, I mean, I'd never met Ant up until sort of watching the podcast myself. And we take the mickey out of each other quite regularly now because we've got that bond of wrestling, but we've also grown to be good mates, I hope. But like even outside of work and outside of the podcast, you'll say a couple of wrestling quotes to someone, they might not have a clue. But when you'll find that one person, you'll latch on and you really do feel like you've got a bond because it is a very niche thing.
Yeah.
If you'll find someone who's into PC gaming, it's a very niche thing. So you tend to find that you gravitate towards them people quite quickly. And I think that's what, I mean, I did it with Dom straight away. And then afterwards it was Ant as well. So it just makes it very nice to be able to sort of have everyone there.
Yeah.
And keep everyone else involved with us because we've all got that same interest, and people watch us and they gravitate towards because we are just talking like a regular person on the street. It's not like watching a high-level wrestling promoter. It's watching the man from 10 doors down talking about his love of wrestling, and that's what I think has sort of caused the overall success of the podcast itself, because everyone knows that we are just like them watching at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, anything to add to that in terms of, because again, you've been with me, from the beginning doing this podcast and building that audience. Why do you think it's been so quote unquote successful? Taking our message outside of our local, a local area in Hull to people around the world.
Well, it's not just building the podcast, but building the brand as well, and that's something that I'm really proud of that we've been able to do. And in terms of using people in a way to help us build the podcast and give them opportunities to learn different skills and stuff like that, which is something that Dom, you do a lot more with Soundsphere. And although it's on a sort of different level with Gimme a Hull Yeah, because we need to keep the personality behind the podcast as a sort of same thing, and we have a lot of discussions about that. That's why, like, when we first talked about bringing Dan in, I was concerned about it because I was like, well, where the personality, like, how do we incorporate this next person, and is this the right person to bring in? And actually watching Dan's stuff, it all made complete sense, and he's brought so much more to the podcast. In terms of developing it into a global brand, I mean, it's incredible, but not only do our audience, like, we give them some entertainment. I mean, wrestling's one of them sports where it's not like football. It's not 2 competitive teams going against each other. It's a dance. It's a sport with an outcome at the end of it. And actually, you can we can watch that and we can review that. Now, commentators on wrestling are all part of the dance. They're all part of the story that's going on within the ring. And what we can do, because we're not loyal directly to the company, is we can say, well, this was good, this was bad. You would never get a wrestling commentator go, oh, that was a really bad botch. Whereas as commentators on YouTube, we can actually do that. But also we have interactions with people. And when COVID happens, we started to do the live streams a lot more. And it was a really good way of engaging with people. I didn't have any work on at the time, so I was able to stream on a night, on Monday Night Raws, and not worry about having to be up for work the next day. But actually what we was doing is creating a community. And whilst we had several people reporting how much our content had helped them get through quite a difficult time through engagement, they also helped me through difficult times through engagement. And there's sometimes where I feel down on the stream and I'll absolutely go ahead and say, like, you know, guys, I'm not feeling great today. This has happened in my life. Just so you know, and people lift you up. And I now look forward to whenever I'm streaming. It's not a job at all. It's just a hangout with your mates on a multimedia platform.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make there, and you know, we are doing it for the love, but we've been able to do some cool stuff. There's interviews with wrestlers on the channel. There is, I feel like I'm plugging it on the podcast now.
You're going through your spiel now, man.
There's interviews with wrestlers on the podcast with multiple companies. We have associated with huge, hugely renowned wrestling companies like Pro Wrestling Eve. You know, Dan is a fan of the Gimme a Whole Year podcast, and we have that audience and that community there. If we start with Anthony and then go to Dan, what do you think the best thing for you about the podcast is? Do you have any highlights in, you know, through your history and time doing this podcast, things that you look back on and go, you know, that's really cool. I'm really glad that we were a part of that, or I was a part of that.
Oh, I think it's moments on stream that you go back and watch it and get lost in the wrestling. And it's really exciting. It happened to me last night. So watching a wrestling stream where you forget you're on camera almost, and you just completely invested in that. We know we had it with Dom when Bray Wyatt came in, and it just becomes a really natural moment. And they're few and far between, which is absolutely fine because it makes them moments more special. And to share that emotion with people and to enjoy that with people, but also to get people's ideas, you know, and hear about people's lives. You know, I genuinely look forward to every stream and just hearing people. That I wouldn't say there's one specific. It's just this sort of building of a community, and it's so exciting because as it gets bigger and more people are sort of engaging with people, and we're seeing sort of kindness happen between our fans of our podcast. It's great to see like people talking about helping each other out, people lifting each other up. And that's always been our ambition about the podcast, not to make it a negative podcast. While we're all still very laddie, and we all push each other. And I feel that also makes us better as well. And we all take the mick out of each other at various times, but that's just part of the nature of us. And I think that's hopefully what makes part of the podcast popular, because you can have a difference of opinion and they can see that we have these differences of opinions, but we still love each other at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, your thoughts since you came in slightly later when we sort of formed the podcast. What have been some highlights for you, mate?
For me, the biggest part of sort of the highlights that I've had so far is the very first stream I did on my own. Just because I've come into the community itself afterwards, and I did a couple of streams with sort of Dom doing Monday Night Raws before being allowed to do any on my own. And it was just the people that was in stream saying, yeah, we don't mind Dan doing it on his own. He's got comfortable in front of the camera, because 5 years ago, probably, I would have never sort of looked at being on a podcast or doing my own thing on YouTube on a regular basis. I know through my job, I've got to sort of look confident and sort of go up to people that you don't know and talk to them, which to anyone is a very hard thing to do. And then doing it where people can critique you every 30 seconds, every minute, every sort of 10 minutes. It was just the acceptance from the rest of the community and from yourself on the sort of ownership side of things, and then being able to sort of go, yeah, we quite like Dan doing the Monday Night Raws. I know it saved you 3 hours on a Monday night yourselves, but it was just nice to be able to sort of go, yeah, I feel part of the community. They're looking forward to me coming on, and we always have a good bit of back and forth with everyone. But with the highlight itself, my biggest and my most favorite one is the Dom reaction video that you mentioned to a minute ago, because it was just a pure investment in that moment. I was invested myself, but I wasn't as reactive as Dom. But it's forgetting about everything else in the world. And you're focused on what is happening at that moment. And it is just so enjoyable to witness something live like that with so much investment. It's the way I sort of say it to people now is that level of investment was like the last episode of Friends. If you know the sort of bit that I'm talking about, where Rachel gets off the plane and she's on the voicemail to Ross, and then it's the reaction of her being stood at the door with getting off the plane. The amount of people that said that almost broke them. It's just that level of investment in a TV show, in a movie, in a wrestling show, that just makes it so enthralling and brilliant to watch for me.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that we've obviously talked about the video of Dom falling in love with Bray Wyatt, and if you click this banner that's just popped up at the top of the screen, you can actually watch that video. There you go, Dom. You're gonna have to figure out how to do that now, because I don't know how to do it.
There you go, man. Well, we'll talk about Hull in a little while. Obviously, I've bought you here, it wasn't just a self-aggrandizing thing where I was like, oh, I'll promote my podcast on the Hull Yes podcast about Hull. This is about Hull. This is about the best things about the area and the city we live in. But before that, in terms of what makes the podcast sort of the community and things like that, what makes people love it, what do you think it is, aside from the community and aside from the things that you mentioned, that makes it stand out next to much more, I guess, bigger level podcasts, your Wrestle Talks, your What Cultures, Stephen Larson's, which was obviously a huge inspiration on you and I when we started this. What is it that makes our podcast unique and different next to some of those bigger, more well-known podcasts, I would imagine?
I think it's the personalities, and that's why I've always pushed for the personalities on the stream to sort of drive it. It's about who you want to watch deliver your entertainment. Do you want to? A lot of people will engage with wrestling and listen to the commentary. Other people will watch a podcast so that they can communicate with people. And for me, it's all about just being ourselves. And with our people have always said, especially with being Dom, and part of the reason we set up a stream is we've got such a unique relationship. I've always pushed Dom. Dom's always pushed me, and we've really treated each other like brothers, even though we're sort of not. And had a laugh. And there's nothing that's out of bounds for me and Dom. Any joke is okay because it's just a joke, because we know where our hearts are at the end of it. And so to me, I think the reason people watch us, I hope the reason people watch us is because of our personality. Now, I think there's other things that we do well as well. There's a lot of people that do stream, even with more viewers than us, that don't have the technical setup that we do. And I think that we do have a decent technical setup. We do have microphones so that people can listen to us. We do have lighting. So that's all part of it. But I think the most important thing is always the personality, and I think that's why people hang out, and that's why we put Hull in the podcast, because we're just two Yorkshire dudes, man,
yeah
and now three Yorkshire dudes and several others in the background as well.
Yeah, absolutely, it has grown. And Dan, as an extension of that, then obviously as someone that's come on board, in terms of the appeal to other people, again, next to other podcasts that people watch, what is it that you think, is it that community, and is it the things that Anthony said there, or do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Anthony's pretty much hit every nail on the head there. As I was saying earlier on, you gravitate to people that you feel are very similar to yourself. And I mean, we've all got the same sort of interest in music. We've got sort of similar interest in wrestling. And the people that normally I watch myself, I can see little bits of myself in them as well. And that's where I think that we've got a good range of different personalities on the shows, but that gives us good scope. So I'll talk about something that yourselves might not be interested in, but someone else on the comment section might have that involvement. So they feel like they know me a bit more. Even though it's literally just through a computer screen, you feel like you know someone a lot more when they're talking about everything else in their lives as well.
Yeah.
So with myself, you can probably see right above my head all of the Funkos. And I've had quite a few chats with people on the shows about the Funkos that I collect.
Because that's one of your passions, obviously.
It's a passion of mine. And that way, it's not just wrestling. There's something else. So if there's not much happening on the show, there is something that we can still have a chat about and still keep it entertaining, keep people invested, and keep people coming back. And I think that that's why we seem to be able to sort of keep people coming back show after show, week after week.
Yeah.
Because we are three down-to-earth people. We're just three northern lads from the UK. But we have the ability to accept and talk to everyone and make everyone feel comfortable coming back week after week.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I do want to fit one in around podcasting before we move on to Hull. Obviously, you know, again, for anybody that watches the Gimme a Hull Yeah podcast and anybody that, you know, wants to set up their own stream, obviously we've had many discussions about quality, about content, but we have also worked with some of the bigger wrestling companies in the world. You know, Anthony has done stuff with WWE. I have Impact Wrestling as well, these globally renowned companies. And we now have the confidence and ability to do that. So what would your advice be to anybody who's watching the Gimme a Hull Yeah podcast and maybe thinks, oh, well, you know, I'm in Hull. That's not a place where you can have a good podcast. That's not a place where I can work with these bigger level brands or form these relationships with you know, internationally renowned wrestling companies like Pro Wrestling Eve. What would be your advice to anybody that wants to set up their own thing? Sort of key tips. If we start with Dan and then move to Anthony.
For me, I think it's just about the passion you have. When I first started doing it with you guys, I was doing it on a tablet, just to make sure I was creating sort of something for the podcast itself. Once you've sort of got a bit more time and you've got a bit more know-how, then it might be worth investing in a better camera, better microphone, a better product to do the content on. But I mean, for myself, I enjoy sort of the graphic side of things. I mean, as you can both attest to, I do a lot of the thumbnails for our stuff. And I can do a thumbnail for a YouTube show in about 10 minutes. But it's just about having the time to make it look professional. And the more you look professional, it makes it easier to feel professional. And when you feel professional, that can come across a lot easier because you're feeling good about the podcast. You're feeling good about the setup that you've got. And you can build it from there. It doesn't have to be a £250 microphone and a £300 webcam. It can be the basics as long as you're producing what you feel is the best of your ability at the time.
Yeah. Anthony, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the biggest advice, get phone out and do it, right? Most of us have one of these, phone out, record yourself, do it, because until you start producing content, you can't learn about what your positives are, about what you need to advance in the future. It's one of the things that me and Dom talk about a lot in terms of like investment into the podcast. It's like, how beneficial is that going to be at the minute? And sometimes we have to step ourselves back because we're not we don't have 100,000 listeners every week. We've got a small podcast, and while we can do things and teach ourselves new techniques to be able to create that, and you will absolutely be able to do that, but the first thing is pick up your phone and talk about your passions, whether it's on video, whether it's on audio. Talk about your passion, and then people will start getting engaged with it. And once people start getting engaged with it, you can start looking at ways to improve it and self-teaching you things, skills that will help you improve the brand that you are now creating.
Yeah. So developing those skills. Anthony, you mentioned, earlier, we are from Hull originally. We've both left the city and come back. Dan, you have obviously worked and lived in Hull for a long time. You've obviously got family from around the world as well now. If we start with Anthony and then move to Dan, what is it that you love most about Hull? What is it that keeps you here? Because again, you have left the city. You've been able to live in Nottingham, Northampton, other places, but you've come back to Hull and you've decided to create, have a creative project here in the Gimme Hull Yeah podcast, live and work here as well. Dan, the same. You have opportunities to travel the world and you stay in Hull, and Hull is a big part of who you are. So why do you love Hull so much? What is it that captivates you about this city?
Well, whilst I grew up in Hull, I don't think it was necessarily that kept me loyal to it. And actually, Hull's changed a lot since growing up in it. I think one of the major investments in Hull was the Deep. And once you had that sort of major investment, an aquarium, I've been to it like 3 times in my life. But actually what it does is it brings people into the city, and it started to make the city up its game in all areas. And it feels like since the Deep's been built, we're sort of seeing that infrastructure expand. Now, one of the interesting things about the Deep, and why it's a really interesting sort of case in point, is the architectural style of the Deep and the whole sort of bow of a ship that it's sort of designed on. And actually you can see new builds within Hull, like the C4DI building, which mimic that, or St. Stephen's, which the roof mimics that. And it's become this really interesting architectural style. And then once we had 2017, the Hull City of Culture, the City of Hull had the global eyes on it, and it had to sort of up its game and up its cleanliness. It had to rebuild its foundations in many situations in the city centre, where they redid all the paving. And so there was a lot of time and development put on that to be able to give it this global audience to the world. And whilst all this was happening, the reason that had happened was because of the underground art scene that was happening and people getting involved in that. But the underground art scene, the music scene, we all grew up in Spiders, the nightclub in Hull, and that is an institution that you just don't get in other cities. And so I've always been, I went away to university. It's great. I lived away at certain times, but I've always been drawn back to Hull because I think it's a really emerging city that offers so much. And when my partner, who currently lives down south, I look at the things that they have around them in terms of, especially for the kids. And there's so much in Hull for kids to do, man. There's so much that they can do. We've got a little arcade, playing old arcade games for a £5 and go send them in there for a bit and have a cup of coffee while they're enjoying themselves. There's trampoline parks. There's so much in Hull in a small space. And my partner lives in London, and London, there should be everything, but actually it's all a train away and it's quite difficult. Hull's got everything that you need, plus it's got some wonderful sort of cult stuff and stuff that you can find your niche stuff, I think is what I'm going to say, that you can sort of engage in. If you want to paint miniatures, there's places to do that. If you want support from the library, and they offer incredible support, both legal advice on copyright, stuff like that, and then the massive shows that we get in. I mean, we've just had Les Mis in the whole new theatre, massive sort of global show. So as well as well-renowned artists like Robert Plant, Placebo, they've been here now. Bonus is doing some outstanding stuff. Corey Taylor was there. I know we're all a big fan of Corey Taylor, and he was there the other week. So the city is, from what it was 30 years ago, man, it has come on leaps and bounds, and I am proud to live in Hull and be a Hullomaniac. That's not the actual official term, but that's what we call our fans on the podcasts. So yeah, I'm a proud Hullomaniac, baby.
Absolutely. Dan, your thoughts on that?
I can completely understand with the sentiment with the Deep, because I'm a season ticket holder.
There we go. Dan likes looking at his fishes.
Oh yes. But yeah, there's so many different areas of culture that we have. We have what's called the Bankside Art Gallery, which is just for graffiti artists. It's a big street, really nice big walls on there. And every couple of months, it's updated with new pieces of artwork. And being able to walk up and down there every couple of months and see fresh art all the time for free is incredible. We did even have our own Banksy piece in Hull a few years back, where we was the City of Culture. Banksy came, appeared in Hull, did a piece, and then disappeared, as he does. And to say that we've had a artist of that caliber come to Hull because of the culture level, it says something. We have, I think, absolutely fantastic museums. One of our biggest one, our Maritime Museum, because we was a big port years ago, is in the middle of a multi-million-pound refurbishment. We've got a transport museum. We've got the Wilberforce Museum. William Wilberforce, who ended slavery in the UK, big part of the whole culture because of where he was from. We've obviously got the Deep, but we've got so many different things that people can do. Whether you're on a budget, whether you've got an unlimited budget, you've got so many different areas to be able to sort of take the kids out for an hour or two, or take them out for a full day. We've got just outside of Hull, we've got places like Go Ape that are still technically classed within the sort of Hull boundaries. Great day out, absolutely amazing fun.
Yeah.
Inside of Hull, you've got shopping centres, which they've got that many different things in them, ranging from clothes shops to toy shops to whatever you want.
Yeah.
And being able to say that it's all right on your doorstep, it's fantastic because you're never going to go bored. I mean, once you've lived here, as long as we probably have, we've done them all, but then you start again because they'll have had new investment from different things, or they'll have changed something, they'll have closed the shop down or reopened something different.
Mm.
And it just means that you've always got something to keep you entertained. We've got amazing nightlife. I've done nights out in Leeds, I've done them in Liverpool, I've done them in Newcastle. And I don't think the nightlife in there can compare to Hull. A lot of people go out of Hull for a night out, but they don't stop to appreciate how good the nightlife is in Hull itself.
There's a lot of good stuff, in Hull, and we'll, I was going to actually ask you, one of the sort of side questions I had was that alternative community that we all grew up in. I thought that would be good to mention. Very welcoming to me as someone who grew up with cerebral palsy and always felt a bit different. Anthony, many years ago, obviously you were also a huge part of that scene in terms of, and you were kind of. You and I were both quite different in the way that we looked, in the way that we acted, in the way that we dressed, etc., etc. And I felt quite welcoming, welcomed in that scene. And I wonder, Dan, obviously I didn't grow up with you, but I wonder if you'd like to comment on Hull's alternative, music scene, the alternative scene, and how you've seen that grow and develop. Because for me, it is still friendly, it is still supportive, and for all the perhaps. Some people don't actually give Hull that much credit for being diverse and being supportive, but I find, as someone that lives here now, that it is very supportive and very inclusive. And I wonder if you guys had any viewpoints on that. Do you want to start, Dan, and then move to Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, like Ant alluded to it earlier on with the Spiders nightclub, alternative rock music scene, everything sort of that level, sort of rock, metal, is available there. And I've been going there for years, and I've never had a negative thing said in there. It's very rare you hear of any problems in there. I mean, one place that we probably remember quite well, which is sad to say it's closed down, is Ringside, which was an absolutely fantastic pub with an upstairs room, which had quite a lot of up and coming bands in there. We've got Welly nightclub, which again, some of the bands that have been there are global names. And being able to sort of have them come to your doorstep without having to travel a million miles away is absolutely fantastic. You've got, I mean, you did one, I think, a while back there, Delphi, which again is another place that is great for up and coming music, alternative music. And it's just so nice to be able to go and see bands and be able to say 10 years down the line, I remember before they made it big, and have that on sort of on your record, having photos, because a lot of the bands that do come are still starting out or still building their name. And a lot of the time, after the gigs, they'll come and take photos. They'll even have a proper drink with you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't think there's many places that'll give you that level of interaction with up and coming bands than a lot of the places in Hull do.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. Bring Me the Horizon, other bands have all been through Ringside, and you know, look at where they are now. It's an interesting point. Anthony, again, as someone that again looked and dressed as we did when we were growing up, and obviously you did also have you know, it's not all sunshine and roses. Obviously, you did have troubles because of that as well. As someone that's obviously seen the change over the years in terms of accessibility, diversity in Hull. You know, what are your thoughts on the alternative community and how welcoming it is now versus what it used to be?
I think it's interesting because you're right. I certainly did have troubles, and a lot of the time I put myself in that situation because actually what I wasn't willing to do was to let myself be sheltered, or I would quite happily approach someone in the face and say, "This is me." If you don't, you know, I might be wearing a pair of 6-inch heels, but I'll put them heels right up your backside if you carry on being an asshole. Do you know what I mean? And actually, so them instances are few and far between. But what you find when you've got a community like that is suddenly the community gets behind you and say, "Hang on a second, he's one of us, right? He's one of us. Back off and let it be." And I think that's probably, you know, one of the things I was going to say earlier about when you asked about what we like about Hull. One of the things is talking, right? People talk. People have conversations in the street. When you're in other cities, that doesn't happen, man. Our lass is always like really confused by the fact that I'll have a conversation with someone working behind Superdrugs and just have a conversation just because it's part of my day. And guess what? I might make her laugh. You know, I might make her day a little bit, and that's good. And I feel that that's a massive part of Hull that's hugely underrated because you don't see it in other places. People just head down, get on with what you need to do, and actually just stop and have a conversation. Just ask how someone is. Ask, you know, take the mick out of the carrot that looks a bit like a bunny rabbit. You know, as it goes by, like people can be shocked by it because it's like it's not what they expect in other cities, but like in Hull, it's just part of it, and you have a bit of the banter with them straight away, you know. So Spider's the alternative scene, like Dan says. There's several offshoots of that, from bands to other clubs that have opened and closed during the years. And while we're all sort of invested in that, I do think there's so many other things happening in the city. Dart club, if you wanted to go to a dart club, you could do that. If you wanted to play lawn bowls, you can absolutely do that. Do you fancy going for lawn bowls at some point when we're done?
Oh, sure, yeah, definitely, man, definitely.
Are you any good at that?
I've played bowls before, yeah, I could do that.
Who do you think could win out of me and you?
I don't know, mate. I think you probably do all right, but we'll have to.
We'll have a competition.
We'll have a competition. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, yeah, it is interesting to get your thoughts on that because again, you've seen it develop, and Hull's reputation, I think, has developed as well. It has become a more inclusive place, and it sounds like you've sort of seen that firsthand, really, and how welcoming the city can be.
Absolutely, man, absolutely. But don't forget, I mean, one of the biggest glam rock bands of our time, in David Bowie, the members were all from Hull. You know, that's why Spiders is called Spiders, because of the Spiders from Mars, from Mick Ronson, Trevor Bolder. But the point is, I think the alternative has always been a part of Hull, and remains strong and exciting and fun. And I can't wait to go out again and get absolutely drunk.
I'm sure we will, absolutely. And I think, you know, just before we do a couple of quick fire questions on favorite places and things to go and see in Hull, you know, we have been, obviously, this is a positive podcast about Hull, but do you think there's any ways Hull can improve, any challenges? You know, we mentioned earlier, you know, are there any restrictions on, say, creativity from Hull if you want to work, because you work in theatre, Anthony, and your background is in theatre. You know, obviously we do run a podcast that is seen by people outside of the city, but do you think there are any restrictions, you know, career-wise or anything like that, and any ways Hull can improve? If you start, Anthony, and then go to Dan.
I think one of the biggest problems Hull's always had comes from a poem which was written in the 1860s, I believe. And it was a poem which talked about Hull, and it talked about Hull being the end of the line. And that was basically because it was the end of the train line, and then they developed onto Hornsey and stuff like that, but eventually got cut. The point was it was the end of the line, and it was seen as an insult. It was seen as this is the as far as you can sort of go to the east, I guess. And since then, the city becomes super defensive, and in many respects, it can still be super defensive. And actually, I think people do need to sort of go and explore other areas and explore other things, because while our city is brilliant and great, there are great things in other cities, and there are areas where we can learn from what other cities are doing really well. So for me, that would be the one thing, the sort of defensiveness that we have from Hull, either being sort of vocal about defending our city or defending ourselves. And Dom, the other reason for this is the war, man. I mean, we was in the top 4 bombed most cities in the UK, and them other cities were Portsmouth, Liverpool, London. And we didn't get the financial support that they did, so we had to hard it up for years. And I do think Hull has, and I think it has been passed on to us. Like, we have an attitude of get on with it, And actually, I don't think that other cities necessarily have that sort of hardness and defensiveness that we possess, and I'm trying to explain as well why I think that's the case. A lot of people at theatre, you talk about working in theatre. A lot of people for a long time in Hull, the theatre numbers weren't as great, and they've got so much better since 2017, obviously with theatre culture and sort of exposing people to culture. But the reason that they didn't go to theatre is because there was afraid that if they spent the money, then they wouldn't have the money to be able to afford the food that they have in the week, or they won't be able to afford that luxury, afford the theatre as an entertainment of luxury. But actually, then the realization eventually comes in that you're spending as much going for a few pints at pub. So I think we are changing that sort of attitude, and I think it's really great that we are.
Yeah. Dan, your thoughts on any ways you'd like to see Hull improve, and any restrictions you feel like we might have because we're from Hull?
I think that in Hull, we do everything that we shout about and we've shouted about on this podcast really well. Sometimes the infrastructure of the city itself can sometimes be its detriment, because other people come from outside and complain about our one-way systems, our bus lanes, because they don't seem to be in a logical place. But it's been done through town plannings and stuff like that. We can't help, but we can negate that with what we think are very good positives. I mean, we've got some things that you'll go 10 miles outside of Hull and they've never heard of. And I think that anytime you look at a negative, it always has so many people jump on that bandwagon and say, yeah, I think that too, or I agree and I want to improve it. And I think it's look within first, see what we can improve inside Hull in terms of anything. Sometimes it could be roadworks. We do get them quite a lot, but they're there for a reason. Embrace it, move on, stop complaining about it. And then once you do that, you'll actually realise how much more the city's got to offer when you stop looking at the negatives.
Yeah.
You'll look at somewhere like Leeds, they'll probably have roadworks going on every single week of the year. We've got roadworks going on every single week of the year. There's not much you can do about it because it's there to improve the service.
Yeah.
I think us, compared to a lot of other cities, have got a better public transport infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that stuff like that gets enough credit. You can go to Leeds and the buses might only be every 30 minutes or every hour.
Yeah.
You'll look at ours, we've got buses every 10 minutes to every edge of the city.
Yeah.
And I do think that the positives outweigh the negatives. So I don't like talking about the negative stuff if I can help it, because there's so much better things going on than focus on a couple of little parts of that.
Yeah. Absolutely, I totally agree with you. And again, before we wind it up, talking about some of those good things, quick fire questions. Now we like to finish off on these, so I'm going to ask you about to name an exciting, interesting fact in Hull in a second. But first off, favorite cafe or bar or place to eat? If we start with Dan, then go to Anthony for this one. Favorite bar or place to eat, or cafe, bar, restaurant as well. In Hull, and why you love it so much?
For me, it's not a restaurant, it's not a cafe, it's not a bar, it's a takeaway. And for me, what was that I look for?
I'm excited. I'm like, what takeaway is he going to say? What? Where am I eating? Like next week? Go on.
If I recommend it every time someone comes to Hull. I say to them, we're going there for something to eat, and it's Dirt Burger.
Oh, Dirt Burger's cool, man. Dirt Burger is cool.
Exactly. You know what I'm talking about then.
Mm-hmm.
It's a independent food chain that's got 2 or 3 places in Hull, and they make their own burgers. They make their own what's called dope sauce, and they've taken the American influence of dope meaning something very good, something amazing, and used it in their idea of creating what I think is the perfect burger. And you might pay more than Burger King, you might pay more than McDonald's, but it's going to an independent chain that was founded in Hull. And the guy who owns it does a lot of charity work throughout Christmas and New Year. So he's giving back to the community. And I'm not just saying it because of that. I'm saying it because I rate everywhere I go based on how good their burger is. If you go to a Wetherspoons and the burger is rubbish, I don't go to that Wetherspoons again. I will go out of my way to go to somewhere that I've tried a burger before and absolutely enjoyed. So to me, if you ever come to Hull, the first thing you should be doing is ordering a Dirt Burger.
Fair enough.
Nice. I love any Wetherspoons. They're all the bloody same, man. They're all just microwave burgers. Just throw it in a thing and get it out there.
Yeah, Anthony, your favorite place to eat, cafe, bar, anything like that?
Cafe, nibble, outstanding, fresh food. That'd also go for restaurant as well. I think it's that damn good. I think it's so cheap as well for what it is. Like you're getting, seriously, they could have a Michelin star with some of the stuff they like create. Like I know it is just a cheap cafe, but it's damn good, and they really do a good job. But Anna did a great job of that when she started that business. I think it's wonderful. And so that's restaurant and cafe. Bar, it's got to be Spiders, man. I mean, it's our sort of it's our old homegrown. Oh, the other bar I like is Old English. I like that because of the sort of theatre background a lot. So you can quite often find me milling over a pint there on a general sunny afternoon. Not in Hull. It's never done in Hull.
never done in Hull. Yeah, absolutely. In I suppose an extension of that, if you were, outside of Dope Burger, because again, Dan, you've got family now that live in the US, or Anthony, you've got a bunch of friends that live around the country. What if somebody is coming into Hull from the outside? Where do you take them? What do you tell them about? What are your kind of how do you woo them to love Hull? What do you take them to? If you're bringing someone from outside of the city, say from the US or other parts of the UK, what do you bring them to if you bring them to Hull?
Spiders, if they're alternative, take them to Spiders, show them a night out at Spiders, get them drunk, so they'll go home with the great memories. And Humber Street as well, actually. I think Humber Street's a really beautiful sort of area that kind of describes Hull in many respects, and I think it's great. And it leads on to the marina, which is sort of the obvious sort of follow-up to that as well. So a beautiful sort of maritime town areas, that'd be my bag.
Yeah, Humber Street's amazing. Dan, again, aside from Dope Burger, if your family come back from the US or you bring anybody else from outside the city, where do you take them and what do you do with them?
We alluded to it earlier on about the Deep. It's such a great tourist attraction for people that have never been to Hull. Even if you have been to Hull, it's still a great, entertaining, and it's a very educational day out as well. Yeah. My other favourite place to haunt is Arcade Hub Hull, which is at the bottom of Prince's Quay. That's where Ant was talking about all of the retro games. You pay once, you can stay all day, and you can play everything from 80s vintage arcade games to simulators to stuff like that. It's just such a great fun hour, 2, 3, 4 hours, and you can get lost in your time there.
Yeah.
You can turn up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and but before you've played 10 games, it could be 6 or 7 o'clock, and you just don't know where the time's going because it's that engrossing and that enjoyable.
Absolutely, it's lovely to hear about again some of your favorite bits of Hull. It's funny talking to people. Obviously, I know you guys really well, but it's nice to hear about your passion for the city and places you like to go. Thank you so much for taking the time out to share some of this stuff with me. Before we wind down, then, but I guess I'm putting you under pressure now. Do you have any key facts you'd like to share with people? Any sort of surprising Hull facts that you know? I mean, for example, Dan, I know you're a magician and a great magician, but aside from that, about Hull itself, any sort of key facts you'd like to share or something that you know that you'd like to impart on others?
We have a couple of things in Hull that, like I said, you go 10 miles outside of Hull, you'll struggle to find. One of them, we know about it quite well, is American chip spice. All it is a salt type flavouring with paprika and a few other bits in there. But you'll put that on a portion of cheesy chips with mayo from a takeaway on a night out. It is the best thing on the planet. The other thing is in Hull, a patty butty.
Ooh,
it is incredible with a load of salt and vinegar.
I've still never had one.
Too stiff.
I've never had one still.
And you've set up the Whole Year podcast, and you've never had a patty. What is wrong with you, man?
Yeah, I need
it's
to.
It's a staple of the whole diet.
Yeah, I might do it. Might have one next week for sure. Okay, cool.
Buy your patty, baby.
There you go. I'll go out for a give me a Hull Year patty at some point.
Give me a Hull Year patty. That'd make a photo, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Hidden places in Hull. There's a little window. The world's smallest official window is in Hull. Just down the road from me, you can find that. I live down the same street as William Wilberforce. He's not there anymore. He died a while ago, but I live down the same street as him. He's pretty cool, and you can go look at a statue of him if you want.
Well, again, to finish up then, guys, I learned this question from Anthony. So is there anything you feel like we've missed? Anything you'd like to plug before we finish up? And
I remember telling you about that. I remember watching one of the first interviews, and I was like, it was great. At the end, ask him if there's out wants to plug, and he was like, "That's a really good idea." And you always do it now. Well played, man.
I do, yeah. So
I'm surprised you remembered that was me that told you that.
Oh, I always do. But it's the first official time I've had a chance to credit you to your face. So, yeah. Anything both of you feel like we've missed? Anything you'd like to plug before we finish up?
Yeah, so I have a podcast that I set up. It's called Gimme a Whole Year podcast. It's one podcast account as opposed to 10 like Dom's got. And it's Gimme a Whole Year. Come and hang out with us. It's a good laugh, even whether you like wrestling or not. We'll just have a good time. And I'm sure there'll be more projects in the future. You can also find that information on Twitter. You can also find it on Facebook. If you just search Gimme a Whole Year on the Google machine, it will come up with several of our things. You can even buy a bloody t-shirt with our face on if you really want to. You can buy a t-shirt with Gimme a Whole Year on if you don't care about the podcast. You like the name. And a mug. Check out the mug that Dan's got. Dan, say something so everyone can see the mug.
There we go. Gimme a Whole Year mug. Absolutely beautiful.
That is a nice mug. I always think one of my highlights from the podcast is, I know this isn't about me, but was when we sold a T-shirt from Bad Wolf Gaming to someone in Jamaica who took it back to Jamaica and was like, oh, I wanted to have something from Hull. They had no idea. I don't think they like wrestling. I don't think but they wanted to have something to take back from Hull to Jamaica, and I always thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, Dan, the pressure's on. Last word. Anything you feel like you'd like to plug? Anything you feel like we've missed?
I think the one thing that we have missed is we haven't asked you what your fa'vouite thing about Hull is.
Ooh, there we go. Never put it back on me.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah.
The community, man. I've obviously had the fortune of living, all over the place in different parts of the world, and the community is unrivaled, and the friendliness. Like you and I went into your shop, to buy something. I think it was a phone to help with my counselling, and then we became friends, and you you've helped me out. You've met my family. You've been an absolute joy to be around. You're so friendly and kind, and me and Emma and all my friends who meet you all say how wonderful you are as a human being. Just a really just kind, empathetic dude, man. There's a lot of love there. So I'd say the community, Anthony, as well. We're like brothers, we're like family, and no matter where we've been, I think even when you were in Nottingham or Northampton or whatever,
you was in the US, and
we've always kept in touch, and I have that a lot with my friends in Hull. People stick with you. People care about what you're doing, even if you don't live in the same city or you move away or whatever. People care. People really give a monkeys about who you are and what you do, rather than what you can do for them or anything like that. So I think the community is what I love about Hull.
Can you give us any interesting facts about Hull, please?
No one ever puts this back on me.
Well, yeah, and I got that question, and I'm like, what bloody facts does he want? I was born in Hull. My mum works. Go on, facts. Let's go, Dom.
Okay. Well, in terms of performance, there are some cool actresses and performers from Hull, originally from the area. So, Danny Wasnot from Asking Alexandria, for those alternative music fans, is originally from Beverley. There's also a number of Marvel actors and performers. You'll have to Google them because the names escape me right now, and I can't. I don't have time. I wasn't prepared.
I want to hear about these actors. Which actors are from Hull?
This is what I mean. This is what I mean. I have to go and Google it now.
Yeah, because you put people on the spot, and this is why we was on the spot.
My
and now
interview.
It's back to you.
It's my interview. It's my.
So you have no pressure. You don't have to do any work because it's your bleeding interview. Well, there we go. Don't invite us on the stream if you don't expect.
Hang on. I'm typing it.
Don't type. No one cares if you can type.
Okay. Well,
Maureen Lipman.
Okay. No, Maureen Lipman. No, God, no. Okay, so there's an actress called Hannah John Kamen, who was in Ant-Man and the Wasp. She's from Beverley. Well, actually grew up in Anlaby, where I currently am. Went to Hull Collegiate School. So there you go. So the Ant-Man and the Wasp. So that's a performer from Anlaby. So that's pretty cool, I think. Yeah. So
do you want me to do a couple more for you?
Go on then. Go on.
Just let him squirm, Danny.
You've got Deborah Stevenson, who was in Coronation Street. She was on Bad Girls. Yeah. You've got Lucy Beaumont, who was married to John Richardson, the stand-up comedian, who was on 8 out of 10 Cats.
Reece Smith.
Like that. Yeah, Reece Smith and Mighty Boosh. Yeah, there is quite a few. Beautiful South. There is a lot more that people give Hull credit for.
Yep.
And the lads at the Gimme a Hull Wrestling Podcast, the International Wrestling Podcast, baby.
There you go, International Wrestling Podcast, Gimme a Hull guys, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking time out on a Sunday evening to talk to me about what you love about Hull and promote the podcast. Thank you so much for your time.
Take it easy. Hull, yeah.